The Book of Psalms is in the Old Testament, sometimes called the Hebrew Bible, and it's an anthology. That means that it's not written by one author, but by many different people at many different times, probably from about the time of David, 1000 BCE, to about 200 BCE, so 800 years. And that means it's written in all sorts of different settings by all sorts of different people with all sorts of different needs. The Psalms forms 5 books, and in it, David is a key figurehead. It comes in each book. The Psalter as a whole in 5 books moves from despair to hope, so it ends on quite a good note. But the overall feel is that it actually forms a sort of story which you can read in 5 different parts. Yeah, I think the important thing to remember is that they're Hebrew poetry, but that means that actually it doesn't follow the sort of conventions of poetry that we think of today, like rhythm and rhyme. They were written, as I've said before, in Hebrew, then translated into Greek, then in the Christian church, in the Western churches, they were translated into Latin, and then through various forms of English into the form of English we have now. I think there are 2 issues as well, because they are ancient poetry. One is the fact that they're written by men, for men, so the language is often pretty patriarchal. And I think the other thing is that they're quite vindictive in places. And that's partly because the age that they were living in was when they wanted to see justice being done and worked out in their own lifetime. Although the Psalms come from a very different world from ours, that ancient world, they're very much about human experience. They come from the heart and they speak in many ways to the heart. They've got a scope which for people of any faith or no faith at all. So it's as if the words of the psalm are like a raft that you can actually use on the rivers of life.
The Psalms were the most important text of the Middle Ages. And if you're a nun, if you're a monk, if you're any ordained person, the ideal was to memorize the entire book of Psalms. And the reason for that was that you would sing all 150 Psalms every single week. And so these Psalms would literally become part of you. They would form your mind. And the style of music that's preserved most frequently in our manuscripts is called plain song or Gregorian chant. It sounds a bit like this. Miserere mei Deus, secundum magnum misericordiam tuam. So what you'll notice there is that it forces you to take a breath in the middle of every single line, and so it becomes this really meditative way of singing that gets out of the way of the text and forces you to think about its meaning. And so to the medieval mind, the Psalms become a companion throughout the entire day that gives you, that allows you to make sense of what's going on in the world and in fact to give you hope for the future.
There is a whole repertoire of psychological techniques that are deployed by psalmists from across the different faith traditions, with one thing in common across all of them, which is that they hold up a mirror for the individual to really look at what's going on. So just as the ordinary bathroom mirror, has a brutal reality to it, is showing us the reality as it is, not as we would wish it to be. So too, a good psalm holds up a mirror for the internal situation. What are the current states of our emotions, of our thinking, and critically, our automatic thinking patterns. And that's where I think psalms can be so powerful, whether they are read in solitude or in congregation. The insights they provide can, and arguably ought, to be carried into the rest of our daily activities. And in that regard, there are many important parallels to how psychotherapy works. And the purpose is not just to benefit during the psychotherapeutic session, but rather to take those insights into our daily lives. And in that regard, I think there are many parallels between psalms from different traditions and psychotherapeutic interventions from different psychological traditions. For the purposes of simplicity, we could categorize them into 2 broad areas, one being self-knowledge and the other being resilience. And a good psalm allows us to navigate external events in a way that is wholesome, that enables us to tap into resilience, fortitude, hope, so that we may then be able to influence the way we think as well as the way we feel. Psalms have been used across world religions for centuries as mechanisms to understand our own thinking and feelings. That process of self-reflection and building self-knowledge is available to each of us, whether we're people of faith or none, because psalmists have so scripted their texts as to enable us to use them as mirrors for looking within. And to that extent, I would encourage you to consider any psalm that inspires you to address a particular challenge you have in your life now. And so for this particular exercise, I would humbly request that you consider your thinking patterns, your emotional patterns, whatever is relevant for the particular challenge and for the psalm that you are inspired by. To consider what is happening with your thinking. What are the automatic thoughts that may arise? What are the emotions you have around a particular issue? How might you reframe the particular thinking patterns you have to change the context within which a particular event is occurring right now? So please take the next 10 minutes to look within and write your own psalm to identify these internal challenges in your thinking, in your emotional patterns, and consider a new approach. How might changing the way you frame the problem in the wider context of your life alter your experience of the specific challenge that you're looking at now? And so the process of using psalms is really similar to the process of using a mirror to understand what is happening right now, reality as it is, not as we would wish it to be. Thank you very much for undertaking a really difficult exercise. Introspection, self-analysis, really looking at how we think is difficult. Looking in the mirror within can be painful. So I salute and applaud the efforts you've just made. And if through that process you have found issues arising that cause you concern, I would strongly recommend you speak to your GP or a mental health practitioner to assist you in that journey. Whether you found the exercise incredibly useful or whether you found it a complete waste of time, it is important that you took the time to invest in yourself. So if you found the exercise less useful than you had hoped, I would encourage you to look again. And the more you look, the more the mirror will clear. And the more the mirror clears, the more you will see. The more you see, the more you'll be able to empower yourself to deal with the challenge that you have addressed in this specific exercise. Thank you for taking the time to do this.